of Directors meeting. Welcome everybody to the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Board of Directors meeting on Wednesday, June 14th. And so glad to have all of you here. And let's get started with the call to order.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start at the seating at the dais. I'm going to start with Director Squazzola.
Here.
Mohan.
Here.
Mekachuk.
Present.
Chua.
Here.
Abekoga.
Here.
Chair Tyson.
Here.
Vice Chair Walia.
Here.
Director Rennie.
Here.
Klein.
Here.
Lee.
Present.
Meadows.
Here.
Thank you. Participating remotely, Director Hilton.
Here.
Thank you. Director Martinez-Beltran.
Here.
Thank you. And we do have a quorum of our board.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you all for being here. Next up is, pardon me, is public comment on items not listed on the agenda. You will see some of the guidelines there, and there's a time limit. And this is for items not on the agenda. Do we have any public? We do. We have one public. Mr. Carney, will you please grace us with your words?
Yes, on behalf of Carbon Free Mountain View and Carbon Free Silicon Valley, on whose boards I serve, I would like to recognize Yvonne Martinez-Beltran as the newest member of the Five-Timer Club. The Five-Timer Club is for those directors of Silicon Valley Clean Energy who have served 5 years on the board. It's an extremely exclusive club, and I'm very proud, if I could find the camera, to show this certificate, which will be sent to her by your staff. So thank you very much, Director Martinez-Beltran, for your dedicated service and leadership.
All right. You probably couldn't hear that, Director, but there was a resounding applause. Do we have any other public comments? We do not see any. All right, very good. Let's move on to the consent calendar. And do we have any public comment on items on the consent items 1A through 1M? I do not see any in the room. And is there any public comment online? Not seeing any. In that case, do we have any discussion or items that wish to be pulled? I do not see any in the room. We do?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Thank you. Director, do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Director Chua. Let's go for a roll call vote then.
Thank you. Chair Tyson.
Yes.
Vice Chair Walia.
Aye.
Director Squazzola.
Aye.
Mohan. Meadows.
Aye.
Rennie.
Aye.
Chua.
Aye.
Mekachuk.
Aye.
Abekoga.
Aye.
Klein.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Hilton.
Aye.
Thank you. Martinez-Beltran.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Great. Thank you very much. Let's move right into the regular calendar and begin with item number 2, the CEO report.
Thank you, Chair Tyson, members of the board. Give you a couple of updates from the CEO report. There's a small blurb here regarding summer readiness. You'll all recollect that September 6th last year, we came very close to a blackout in California. The California Independent System Operator has been talking about the signs look much better this year. There's been a lot of new capacity that's been added, and we're working on our plans in case things go sideways, how we communicate, et cetera. So we'll have more information for you in the coming months. We also will be publishing some high-level GHG metrics for each city. This is something that, over the last many years, we assist cities in their climate action plans. And though we provided quite a bit of data, there's data that's also very specific to each city. So we'll be publishing a table, and there's been requests over the last few years about city-by-city emissions, so we'll be publishing that. We have talked to your staff about this already. I would like to introduce two of the newest members of our staff. And we'll start with Juliet Pascal. She began her new role as community outreach specialist on the ESCA team on May 30th, 2023. However, we all know Juliet for quite a while because she was a Climate Corps Fellow since September 2022. So I'm going to ask Juliet to come on up and introduce herself to you.
Good evening, directors. My name is Juliet. As Girish mentioned, I have had the pleasure of working with some of you on our community outreach events and the opportunity to be at SVCE since September. Learned a lot working with our youth engagement projects and really getting to know the service area through all of our events and sponsorships. And I'm really excited to start this new role and get deeper into this world of community outreach. And as everything kind of ramps back up after the pause that we've had over the past few years, there's a lot of amazing opportunities and new areas to explore for community partnerships. So really grateful for this opportunity and to continue working with hopefully each one of you as we move forward. In my free time, when I'm taking time away from SVCE, I'm usually camping, hiking, spending time with my cat. So really excited to stay here, contribute to an agency with an amazing environmental mission, and serve our service territory. So thank you.
Thank you, Juliet. We're excited to have you join us as well.
Thank you, and just shout out to Pamela Leonard from day one. She has been behind this program. So it's been amazing, and we've had great luck in hiring too. All right, our next new employee is Karen Chang. She'll join Zoe and me as UCLA alum to be part of SVCE. She joined us on May 22nd, 2023 as Manager of Finance and Risk Controls, and she will be reporting, she's working for an Amrit's group. So I will ask her to come up and introduce herself. She is going to have quite a wide portfolio, which is in the CEO report. Karen, would you please come up and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Girish. Good evening, board. Nice to meet you all. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. My name is Karen Chang, and I just joined 3 weeks ago, Manager of Finance and Risk Controls. Prior to joining SVCE, I was in the energy industry for about 9 years, working on various PPA projects, more on the developer side, selling power to financing partners. My focus area was mostly in cash management, optimization, and financial forecasting, budgeting, some part on compliance and risk controls. So I'm very excited to be here tonight to take this role, joining such a great team together working on this green mission. Prior to that, I was in the aerospace industry and got my mechanical engineering degree from UCLA. In my spare time, I enjoy swimming, traveling, and weekends are just a lot of kids' activities. Again, I'm very excited to be here, very honored to be with such a great team and looking forward to working together with all of you in the near future. Thank you again.
Welcome, Karen. And we can't have too many chemical engineers around here, Girish.
She's mechanical.
Oh, I heard, was that mechanical?
Yeah.
I heard chemical. Okay. All right, close enough.
But you're right, we can't have enough chemical engineers. All the battery storage and other things that we need 24/7. I have two more pieces of information. Two of our employees are going to be leaving us. Very sad about that. One is Charles Grinstead, our Senior Manager of Power Resources. He informed us last evening and today that he has another job offer and he will be joining this other entity. So his last day with us is going to be June 30th. So he did a lot of very good work for us in the front office and developed a lot of the contracts that we have, In fact, just today, we closed out our resource adequacy position for RA position for 2023, a lot due to his efforts, so he will be missed. Monica is going to be working on getting a replacement for him, so we'll keep you updated. It's a critical position we're losing, so we're very sorry to see him go. Next, we have another employee who's leaving on June 30th, but I would like your cooperation in giving him a really hard time because he's leaving us. But as he comes up, it's Kevin Armstrong. We really love what Kevin has done for us since 2019, October. He's really a man with multiple hats and just willing to take on whatever was given to him. And so he joined us. He wanted to be part of SVCE, and he does have an engineering background, a management consulting background, and started administrative services. He's helped on a variety of projects, right from prepay. He works on our relationship with our banks, all our benefits, helps us with our retreats, and yeah, just a man of many hats. So I'd like him to come on up, and I don't know what the opposite of introduce oneself is, but that's what he's going to do. I did tell him you were going to torture him through June 30th.
Thank you, Girish. And I think the opposite would be extraduce myself, if that's a real word, but we'll use it for right now. Thank you all, members of the board, for the time that I've been able to spend here within SVCE. As many of you know, I worked at the County of Santa Clara previously and was present at the founding of the organization, and so have fond memories and was very excited to be able to come indoors to participate in the growth of the organization. I feel like the organization's in great hands. There are many new employees who are going to bring a lot of skill and talent to the work that's going on here. I think that SVCE is poised with a number of its programs and its efforts in clean energy procurement to sort of act as a leader and a benchmark for other CCAs in the efforts, and a lot of that points back to your direction. So as I leave, I would just like to say thank you for the work that you've done for the organization and the community. It's been a pleasure and a privilege working here, and I hope that our paths cross in the future. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. How about a nice hand?
That's the end of my report, Chair.
We haven't discussed this, but some of us went to this geothermal facility, and the LinkedIn is hopping with photos and things. I've seen it, and maybe you could say a word or two about the visit we did last week.
Sure. Let's give congratulations to Monica, whose name is, if you didn't know, the Queen of Geothermal. That's how we can refer to her, Her Highness. No, she did an amazing job in getting this contract to us. This is the first geothermal project, first new geothermal project built in the CAISO territory in the last 30 years. I wanted to thank the board members who attended. Had board member Mekchik, Tyson, Rennie, who were there with us. Thank you very much for doing that. We had several of our staff. We had a CEC commissioner. We had the vice president of the CAISO. This was a public power project, so we had about 30 megawatts of output. 3CE and us took 25% each, and the city of Colton, which is part of Southern California Public Power Authority, took 50%. It was sited in the city of Mammoth Lakes, and a tremendous amount of persistence on the part of the developer, Ormat, who had thought of this project and started activities on this about 9 to 10 years before. And they just kept at it. So I thought it was a very well-organized event, and there's nothing like standing there and hearing the thrum of the plant. And that's clean energy that's being shipped across the Sierras to all of us over here. So, you know, I had the opportunity to make some comments and said, our customers want clean energy, and thank, you know, the county of Mono County, the supervisor was there, the city of Mammoth Lakes, and our Matt for doing this. And of course, our fantastic staff who actually arranged all the logistics. Andrea, Lisa, Pam's group, Michaela did an amazing job in publicizing this too. So it's really fantastic to be there because not only do you have a lot of conversations, but you get to see the result of our work, right? So the planning work, the relationships, the decisions that you make, it all kind of comes together at an event like that. So we'll have more opportunities for ribbon cutting events and yeah, look forward to seeing you there. Chair Tyson.
Great, thank you. Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to make one comment that I found interesting. One of the you know, as the speakers were talking about, they talked about how long it took them to get through all the permitting and all the different layers of permitting and different organizations. And what they did is, Girish just mentioned some of the speakers, but what sort of impressed me was they got somebody from the CEC, the newest commissioner from the CEC was there speaking. There was somebody from the CAISO there that was speaking. They had somebody from the National Forest Service speaking and somebody from BLM speaking, in addition to a county level and the city level. And all of these organizations, well, maybe not CEC, but you know, a lot of those were the permitting organizations. So making it show such a big deal, hopefully that the permitting can be cut down to a much shorter period of time. That was one of the comments that the CEO, I think, made, that you know, if we could get permitting down to, I don't know, what did he want, 2 years for permitting or something, exactly, instead of 8 or 10 years, that could really make a big difference in getting more geothermal online. So I thought it was good the way they brought all those entities together so that it really showed how important getting this done and hopefully more of these type of projects done.
Chair Tyson, if I may make two more comments. One is, I'd want to mention that Chair Tyson could have given the tour, had everything to do with heat exchangers and stuff. That was great. I want to give a shout out to board member Mekachuk, who visualized a photograph, which I hope will show up at LinkedIn, but we'd be happy to share it with the board. He had rented a Tesla, and he brought the Tesla right up to the plant. And I think we have a photograph of the 3 board members with the Tesla and the geothermal power plant in the background. So just the visual of clean transportation and a clean grid. So I thought that was pretty cool. I'd leave with one more point. It was kind of a bit of a glib kind of thing I said at my talk was, this plant is like public power. It works behind the scenes, and it's working all the time. So I call it, it's humble power. It's just, so that's what geothermal is, kind of like what public power is, just working away in the background.
I'll just follow up. That was a spectacular day. I mean, to see Mammoth Mountain in the background with the blue sky, and fortunately we had good weather. It wasn't so nice the day before, and all the people that were there, the broad team that Director Rennie talked about. When I went to the ribbon cutting at Rabbit Brush, the solar ribbon cutting there, you could hear in their voices the difficulty that there was in going through the permitting and the building and everything else. And you heard the same thing at at Casa Diablo 4. So it was wonderful to be there, and thank you for the invitation.
It's great to hear about that. I'm going to bring it back to us locally. Unfortunately, Juliet left. I did not want to comment earlier, but I know the work she has done in the community. I was there a couple months ago, when she was there at the Saratoga Elementary School for Arbor Day. It's, as Director Mekachuk is talking about the people, you hear it in their voices. What I saw was Juliet connecting with the little children and sharing with them what's happening, what the future is, and educating them as well as getting them interested, bringing the awareness. And the way she interacted with the children was phenomenal. They were asking all kinds of important questions, and getting them engaged at that early an age at elementary school level is just wonderful. So I welcome her in her new role, which I have personally seen that she's doing a phenomenal job of. And at the same time, welcome to you, Karen Chang.
All right, thank you, everybody, for those wonderful words. Let's move on to item number 3, which is the strategic plan update.
Thank you, Chair Tyson, members of the board. So for those of you who have been here in previous years, some of the frame of this will feel repetitive. So we do have a process around our strategic plan, and we'll go to the next slide, and you'll see that there's a timeline over here, and the strategic plan is not a standalone plan. It actually works with other initiatives that we have. Those include our budget, the CEO evaluation, and the strategic work plan. If you go to the next slide, you'll see the 3 steps, all in service of our mission at the top. So at the bottom step is enterprise risk management. And you'll hear this from Amrit, you'll hear it from Monica about risk management. So in the last couple of years, we've got to that next level of sophistication, and give credit to Amrit. This year, just getting to that next level, and you'll hear about it when he talks about stress tests next, at the next item. So we look at what our risks and opportunities are at the staff level. We get input from all staff, and then, you know, there's a lot of detail there. And it doesn't make sense for us to bring you all that detail, because we're not really going to get the best of your input if we bring you too much detail. So what we try to do is the second step that you have in front of you, strategic focus areas, where we talk about, and many of, I basically stole this from your cities. Your city managers come up with, what are your priorities for the next year, right? So it's essentially that, and calling it strategic focus areas. It's a way to have a conversation and a dialogue about what you want to do, given that we have a ton of stuff that's part of our work plan, things that you've already approved in past years. We don't need to bring this back to you other than reporting how we're doing. So this is what strategic focus areas are. The third step is the budget, because finally, whatever we talk about, you know, whether we're looking at things 10 years out or 1 year out, you need to bring this back into the budget. So this risk management, you know, looks at not just money we're going to be spending in the budget, but money we want to set aside to manage future risks also. And all this is in service of our mission, which is not only carbon-free, affordable, reliable, but it's also with programs to our customers. If you can go to the next slide. This is another framework slide board. On the left-hand side is the actual glossy document, which is also a glossy document on our website. The way I think about this, the minute we publish it, that day it's out of date, right? So the big value is conversations like this. It's the conversation we had just earlier in the study session, which I thought was fantastic. Engaging with the board, thinking about what our future may look like, and start to navigate, you know, ways in which we can accomplish our mission. So the rest of the slide is divided into 2 sections. The left-hand side is what I'd call staff-driven. You have visibility on it, which is the work plan. Today, we have 21 goals and 75 measures. And that actually translates into a lot of tasks. And so that's something that we work on internally. On the right-hand side is these focus areas or priorities, which are board-driven. And the arrow between them say there's a mapping between the two. If we go to the next slide, I'll tell you that I had essentially the same presentation to the executive committee. And as I've already talked to you about before, it seems like I'm not proposing, and the exec committee agreed to not have any changes to our mission and our measure. You can go to the next slide. And I will stop for questions, of course, and comments, but feel free at any time. This is just last year's 5 strategic focus areas. And this year, they're not really significantly different, but I will talk to you about the differences that we do have. Next slide. You'll see on the left-hand side, under the yellow box, is last year's strategic focus areas. On the right is what I'm proposing for this year's strategic focus areas. So let me go through each of them and talk to you about the similarities and differences. In item 1, the difference here is around reliable grid actions. So last year we just focused on 24/7 clean energy. You heard about it in the workshop today about Google Clean. But we also, last year we almost had a blackout. 2 years ago we actually had a blackout. So even though we are a commodity-only entity, to further our goals on electrification, if we have an unreliable distribution and transmission grid, either clean resources are not getting permitted and interconnected fast enough, or homes are not getting hooked up fast enough at the distribution side. So I don't actually know what our role would be because PG&E owns that whole space, but doing nothing also doesn't seem like the thing to do. So part of what we are looking at, what I would like for us to look at, let's examine, there's a targeted role. It may be more on information sharing. It may be advocacy in a certain area. So that's what I'm looking at. So again, this is some of these are not fully formed, but that's the new piece that I've brought into this focus area. The second is pretty similar. It's expanding our customer base and interaction. Add a little more detail on this to specify that one is expanding our customer base is not going outside our service territory, but it's only looking at trying to get direct access load into our load. So for example, when Google, we had the 10-year contract with Google, that was load that was previously direct access in our territory that they moved over to us. So that we'd like to continue. And the focus would be on commercial customers. So those are the customers we can grow, right? Because residential customers, Frank, we have a very high participation rate. And if we try and go after residential customers, the money just doesn't work out at this point. So I just made a nuance over there to talk about this is what we're focusing on. We're also going to increase our interaction with customers to further electrification goals. I made that clear. The third point, we called it Inflation Reduction Act last year. This year, we've changed it to Accelerate Building and Transportation Electrification. So it's some of the same underlying bullets and actions that we're taking. If you remember last year, we were in the middle of this process, came to you in like that May, June period. And in July, the Inflation Reduction Act was passed. And by the way, this is the most incorrectly named bill, right? It should be the awesome climate bill, but that's not what they called it. So that's why it was such a big deal for us. We just put that in there to make sure that we have our eye on the ball. But here we broadened it a little bit. You've put aside quite a bit of money on building and transportation electrification. BACMD has passed the NOx rule to ban the sale of gas water heaters from 2027. So that's kind of what we're looking at. And then we broadened the scope instead of just saying Inflation Reduction Act. It's talking about funding from federal and state sources. So broaden that. So that's what number 3 is. Number 4, instead of just calling it one word, finance, you'll notice that we're using more of a phraseology over here. Thank you, Executive Committee and Director Mekachuk. Implement innovative financing solutions so it's pretty similar, but it's nuanced, but we're talking about that. And then the last stays the same, attract and retain employees. Now, in this presentation, which we will send, which will be posted to the web soon after this meeting, in the appendix, we have some bullet points under each one of these that go into a little more detail. We, at the same time, if you look at the slide, there's some supporting work that continues to be done. The risks and opportunities continue to be updated by our directors and every employee. So we'll update our strategies and measures and provide that to you at the October meeting. At the September meeting, we would like to get the thumbs up on these strategic focus areas. We are also using an online software platform internally to track our work on our entire work plan. So in the 75 measures and 21 goals, it's a lot, and we're growing. We're a lot larger than we were a few years ago. So I'll go to the next slide, which is essentially a graphic which repeats what I just told you. And if we go to the last slide, it's the timeline again, and open to any questions you may have over here. So maybe the ask I have is, if you have any comments on the strategic focus areas, so maybe we can just flip back one slide. We'd like to hear from you. Any comments on this? So it'll either help us change some of these, or we'd say, oh yeah, we'll take that into account. It's part of the work plan. So, or you just said, yeah, this pretty much sounds good. It's pretty much in line with what we want staff to do. Open to any kind of feedback.
I'd like to compliment you on how easy it is to read and understand, and how you've got it down to sort of 5 areas. I think that, as Kevin said yesterday, SVCE is pointing in the right direction, and I think this will help keep us going there and focusing on what we're going to do in the next 12 months. So I compliment you.
Go ahead, Director Lee.
Yeah, thank you. On the very first goal, you talked about the 24/7 clean energy delivery at scale, enhancing distribution and transmission reliability. Knowing that obviously PG&E is the 800-pound gorilla that is doing the actual transmission. I guess the question is, what type of role can we really have in terms of enhancing that? So let's say for the brownout situation, they are not able to get enough energy, for example, right, to feed into the grid. Do we have a role to play, since we actually do buy, energy elsewhere, that we could help in terms of feeding that extra energy during those times in order to lower the brownout? That way, we are actually helping them without touching the actual transmission lines ourselves. Just something to think about.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and this is the difficulty, right? It's PG&E who owns the grid. They'll continue to own the grid and operate it. And like you said, we do contribute by building new energy sources, and that's what the CPUC and the California Independent System Operator are doing, which is they mandate we should be buying certain tranches of clean energy. So we're doing that, and this kind of tight market on resource adequacy, it's just a few years away. It's not going to be as tight. So I think the supply of electricity is going to be okay. But I do think these, the distribution system itself, interconnection is taking a very long time. And then you may have critical facilities in our service area that require a higher level of reliability. So there may be things that we could do there. Like, for example, Redwood Coast Energy Authority up in Humboldt County has, in partnership with PG&E, implemented a microgrid at their airport. And when they had their last huge weather event and outage, it became a tremendous community resource. We're not staffed up for this, all this, but this is one of those. So by the way, one of these things about these strategic focus areas is like, these are probably multiple year kind of initiatives. But part of wanting to bring it to you is just to get that sense of, yeah, you should look at it. I'm very much with you. It's like, I'm not really sure what we're going to do, but I think we should be having that dialogue to see is there something? We have reached out to PG&E, and all of you know the community outreach. So we've reached out to the director there earlier in the year. We continue to have those conversations. You know, I think they are a they are a partner of ours, right? So for us to be successful in decarbonization and pruning the gas grid, for example, we need to be working with PG&E. So, yeah, no answers yet, but at least this is maybe framing that, yeah, we should be involved in some way.
So something in line with that is, since we're into clean energy, is it possible even to contemplate having some type of battery storage strategically placed in location where you believe, hey, these are the no-fail area or somewhere that we need to have specific areas. So whether that might be a potential project for us to get involved with.
100%. Yes.
Thank you. Director Meadows?
Thank you, Chair Tyson. Good evening. Thank you for the information. And my thinking here, my question may be off. Maybe this does exist. And I'm speaking from kind of a selfish perspective. I see a gap in the program. So when you look at the customers and innovative financing solutions, especially to lower income customers, the programs focus on solar plus storage. And I feel, maybe just because I'm one of them, but I've spoken with a lot of people who have solar and no storage, because even the solar installers will tell you this is really expensive now, the prices are going to come down, but I don't see any programs for customers, whether individual customers or even small businesses or multifamily residential, that offer storage to those who have solar. And that would certainly help the grid in situations if you have more people drawing down on their own power during some of the high demand periods. So I wonder if that's already included, because I could well have missed it, and if not, what the thinking is behind that.
Thank you, Director Meadows. I'm going to take most of your comments as something that we'll look into more deeply. We do have a program that we created a couple of years ago, and this last month we amended the contract. This is a contract with Sunrun, and basically they will install solar storage, and they operate some of that storage to provide resource adequacy. So they oversize the battery storage in a customer's house so that they can use it during that 4 to 9 p.m. period. And that RA comes to us. So we provide, a sweetener for them to subsidize their costs. We initially had a certain megawatt amount when we created the program several years ago, and then we cut that by 75%, the megawatt amount. So I agree with you that it's an issue, but we don't have a specific solution right now. So we will take that into, this is where the financing solutions also come in. We're working at this. We have one program. Well, no, that's it. We'll take that in.
I do think that a lot of the early adopters and even mid adopters of solar don't have storage. So, and I don't know, and you guys would know better about that potential. So maybe it's not worth it. But it seems to me, because I haven't been able to convince my husband to invest in that storage, and I know there's a lot of people there who don't have it.
I'll talk to him.
You talk to him. Okay, all right, got it.
Yeah, there are a couple of people on the dais who have storage. One may have a lot.
Well, I can tell you, Director Meadows, my solution is I'm waiting for that vehicle to grid thing, because I've looked at the battery pricing, and the automobiles are so much more powerful. So I'm hoping to make that work. Director Abikoga.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question. We've talked about IRA. I think it's been coming up on a year since it passed, and just trying to get a sense of like where we are exactly in terms of the funding coming down to our level, and then what do you plan to be the role of SVCE relative to our municipalities and the county? Thank you.
Benna Chang will answer that question.
Good evening. Very timely question. So I think with the Inflation Reduction Act, we're seeing the federal government just come out with more and more guidance and program details over this last year. So for example, today, the IRS just came out with rules on how direct pay will work. So how local government agencies, including SVCE, can access tax credits for renewable projects or commercial clean vehicles. So it really is a place where we're waiting for the implementation details to come out on some of these programs. But that is one example where we're really interested to understand the details of how we can access the credits and who's eligible. But there are also additional grant programs, for example, the Greenhouse Reduction Fund, where we're looking very closely at that in terms of the financing that we were just talking about to finance some of these clean projects. So I think more details are coming. We are sharing that information with all of your city staff through the member agency working group as well, talking to your city managers, and we'll continue to do that.
Thank you.
If I may just add to that, in last year's strategic focus area on IRA, we did add something in there on workforce and meeting with labor. So we, actually, Benna has been taking the lead on that. We've done some informal outreach to various labor organizations. We are also drafting up some policies. We're looking at it in a much wider kind of viewpoint than just organized labor. It's just workforce needed for the clean energy transition. What can we do there? So in August, we'll bring you some additional information also. And so in this year's strategic focus areas, that shows up under this number, the third one, as to how do we partner with different workforce organizations to move our mission forward.
I don't see any other board member comments. Let's move in. Do we have any public comments on the strategic plan? Come on up.
Hello, Colin Corbett. Couple of quick comments. My first one was a mission question. I guess the first one will be, how will there be innovative programs when currently the programs do not pay out? And I would say, maybe if there was something, part of this was a report that showed a success rate versus refusal versus deferment rate of all the applications for all the sorted by all the different types of rebate programs, from heat pump water heater to leaf blower, etc. That would maybe give people more confidence. There is a comment that homes are not getting hooked up fast enough. I would say that's because the incentives that are there don't pay out. And how will you expand your advocacy when most of the interactions as a rebate seeker are usually negative? I will say, as you look to interact more with commercial customers, they will expect contracts with defined milestones and termination clauses. So I would suggest that SVCE adjust their rebates based upon a higher percentage of having to pay out. And for storage, I will say, as a storage and solar owner, there is just a significant lack of choices, and the complexity is significant. And people will sell you a solution based upon what they want to sell you, not because of what you need. And honestly, your needs may vary wildly based upon what they're trying to sell you. I don't know that there's one unified resource or that SVCE could offer that resource, but there is nobody you can just pick up the phone with and meet for hours and say, give me a good unified solution. That would be great. Nobody really exists that does that. Okay, that covers my comments. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments.
Thank you.
Do we have any other public comments? I don't see any. So thank you for that report. That's a presentation, not for action. And so we'll move on to item number 4, which is results of stress test analysis for the upcoming year planning horizon. It's good. Yep.
Okay, one more time. Good evening, directors. So I'm going to talk about stress test, and Grish mentioned the enterprise risk management framework. So this year we're expanding the way we do risk assessment at SVCE, and I'll go into a little bit of highlights of the ERM framework, enterprise risk management, and tell you where the stress test fits in. This is the second year we're doing the stress test, so we do this important analysis to make sure that we manage risks that can derail us from achieving our mission. Go to the next slide. So today, I'll talk about the findings of the stress test analysis that we did this year. And when I go through this analysis, you'll notice that it's very similar to what we did last year. So we're building off of the learnings we had from the analysis we did last year, because some of the risks one of the significant risks we're facing is same as what we faced last year. So we're updating it and that analysis and looking at where the numbers stand today. So as I mentioned, in doing so, I will first go through the highlights of the enterprise risk management framework. I'll talk about how we constructed the stress test scenario. And as I mentioned, it's similar to the stress test analysis of last year. And if you remember, one of the key risks we're facing is a collapse in energy prices. And I'll go through how we model that. And then I'll talk about how do we basically manage that risk? What are the best mitigation measures? And if you remember, the way one of the best mitigations we have is actually to hold ample reserves, so that if the stress scenario were to occur, we're in a financial position to respond to it. And that is how we now set our reserve target levels, and I'll talk about that. And then I'll conclude with where we go from here, which is what the implications of this analysis is to how we set the budget and what we will be asking for approval in the September timeframe when we bring the budget to the board. Okay, so that's the plan of the presentation. So enterprise risk management framework. So this is a comprehensive organization-wide assessment of risks. And the way we do this is at the beginning of the year, we go out throughout the organization, reach out to all our employees, and basically say, what are some of the risks that we're facing in the organization? And this is the first year we put what we're calling a risk register, which is a record of our risks. It's a living document. It's something that we continuously add to as we learn more about the risks we face. I'm using the word risk, but it's actually risks and opportunities. If you remember the chart that Grish mentioned, at the top of our planning process is our mission. So we're looking at how can we move the needle advance on our mission, which is to decarbonize in our communities. So we're looking at risks that can derail us, as well as opportunities that can help us basically move in that direction. So both are equally important, and we consider both in this framework. So the risk register is basically a record of the risks and opportunities we see right now. And it basically lists what the current mitigations are, current plan of actions are, and if we were to take those actions, what the residual level of risk is, and we go through a discussion internally to say, is that the level of risk that we're comfortable living with? Okay, and how do we basically come up with that assessment? There's a risk matrix, and we went through a little bit more detail of this framework with the finance committee meeting, and with the executive committee. So I'm giving you a very high level discussions, but open to any questions you have, and I'll take them along as I'm giving the presentation. So in the risk matrix, we basically, in one dimension, we're saying what's the likelihood of a risk event or an opportunity to occur? What's the likelihood? And then on another dimension, we basically measure if the event were to occur, what is the consequence to the organization? So in other words, what does it mean in terms of achieving our mission? Could it derail us? Could it advance us? And what the impact is? And then we go through internally and we calibrate these risks and opportunities and basically agree on a tolerance level that we can live with, that we think is optimal. Now, obviously, it sounds very scientific, but this is based on subject matter expertise, right? How do you assess a likelihood of some event occurring? A lot of that is in each of our areas. The subject matter basically has a view and an assessment of what that is. And to the extent we can quantify, we quantify the risks. And stress test is one of those that we'll go through and where we do quantify the risk. So stress test is basically a component of ERM. So basically, we look at the risk register and we look at all the risk drivers we've identified in the risk register, and we say, what are some of the plausible combinations of this risk that can materialize and that can have severe consequence on us? And these are, you can think of these as plausible, but extreme. In other words, they can occur. And the scenario that I'm going to describe in the stress test that we modeled it is something that has happened many times in our industry, which is a sudden collapse in energy prices. So, anyways, that's how we come up with the stress test. We go through the risk register in a comprehensive way. We identify scenarios we want to model, and it's a very important component. One of the points I want to emphasize on the slide there, it's an important component of our business, because we are basically managing and running a commodity portfolio business risk. And commodity, we have risk metrics that we monitor on a weekly basis, and we share with our risk committee. We call gross margin at risk, revenues at risk, and in the financial industry that you'll hear terms like value at risk. Very similar concept. But these risk metrics they're not gonna measure disruptions in marketplace. They're not gonna measure sudden increase in prices, sudden collapse in prices, the disruptions. And this is where stress test comes in. If you remember recently, Silicon Valley Bank went under. And one of the criticisms of management was that they did not do stress tests. In their case, the risk that they're facing is interest rate volatility. They did not, if they had stress tested the portfolio, they would have learned insights as to the organization's capability to address a sudden increase in interest rate, just as we are assessing sudden increase and sudden decrease in prices on our portfolio. Okay, so that's sort of the essence of stress tests. Yeah. So I want to, in this slide, what I'm trying to illustrate is that we're building off of the learnings we had in the stress tests last year. This year we did one stress test analysis. Last year we actually did 5 scenarios. 4 of those scenarios were based on market price uncertainties. We're not replicating some of those scenarios because we know what we learned from those scenarios are still applicable, and the scenario that we are modeling, we know it's the most severe of those scenarios. And all the other framework, all the other elements of risk are now comprehensively assessed in the ERM framework, Enterprise Risk Management Framework. So, so the stress test that I'm going to present today is a price collapse scenario under an economic recession condition, which is very likely given some of the news we're hearing about the economy, that we may likely go into a recession. So we'll go to the next slide. So the construction of this year's stress test is, what happens if the energy prices collapse? And we're statistically modeling the collapse to a 1 percentile level. So basically model the statistical property of market prices. So we have a distribution. And we said, what if they were to go to the 1 percentile level? Which means if we were to believe in that statistical distribution that we build, there's less than 1% chance that prices could be lower than this. And of course, those metrics have inherent weaknesses. Some of that I alluded to earlier, but that's how we model the price collapse scenario. And along with an economic recession, which would mean that we could have a good amount of load loss. In our case, we're modeling a 5% load loss. We could have increase in customer uncollectibles. And then there's an additional risk that we layer on. This is the regulatory uncertainty, and we modeled this last year, and this issue has not been resolved yet, and it's still before the CPUC, which is a requirement that can make us CCAs post a large amount of cash or liquid assets to provider of last resort, which for us is PG&E. And what basically is happening in this proceeding is IOUs, investor-owned utilities like PG&E, are going to the PUC and saying, hey, if CCAs fail and all that load comes back to us, we are going to be we're going to have a liquidity problem because we won't be able to buy power. We won't have the cash to basically go out and buy power in such short amount of time when all these customers come to us. So one of the proposals before the CPUC is a requirement is the CCAs post 2 months of cost of serving the load, which can be for us as high as $80 million. So that can be a significant draw on our liquidity and cash position. In our stress test, we model it at 40 million. Why 40 million? Because if we want to be consistent with the price assumption scenarios, if prices collapse, that requirement will go down as well. And then the other risk we monitor is counterparty collateral posting requirements. This is a requirement our counterparties have to provide credit support for them. So when we enter into power purchase agreements, the counterparties basically, as we do to them and they do to us, we assess our risk to each other. We basically say prices go up, will the counterparty perform their obligation? And if prices come down, the counterparty in turn is saying, hey, will SVC be able to honor their commitment at the higher price than the prevailing market price? And after certain thresholds, negotiated thresholds are reached, we have to post collateral, basically cash or letters of credit. So that's a draw on our liquidity position. So we want to manage and assess in this scenario what a large draw of cash could be in that case. And the other element is the mark-to-market loss on investments. We've invested our cash, and if we had to suddenly draw on it, could there be a loss because of the timing at which we're pulling the investments? This is not actually much of a risk because we are very conservative in the way we're managing our cash. We talked about this in the October meeting when the board authorized the new investment strategy. And it's a risk that's actually negatively correlated in the sense that when an economic recession happens, most of our investments follow a government code, which very basically restricts where we can invest cash in safe deposit areas. So most of them are in fixed income securities, and if there's an economic recession, the Fed usually drops interest rates, which means the bond prices would go up. So it actually would be more of a favorable outcome for us in this case. Okay, feel free to ask any questions, because a lot of these can be technical. We'll go to the next slide. So the price that we're modeling, I said we'll go to the 1 percentile level. How does that look? If you look at this chart, you can see in the past 15 to 18 months, you can see a significant rise in market prices. And these are forward prices. In other words, for future delivery of energy, where the prices are trading right now. So it's not a forecast of future prices. It's basically where the market is trading right now it's the market price if you wanted to contract for future delivery of energy right now. These prices can go up and down, and the trend recently has been a significant increase. What if they were to suddenly reverse trend and come down? So the prices, the 1 percentile level prices we've modeled, if you look at those on the right side of the chart here, they're not that far off from where prices were, in near past, as in like 15 or 18 months ago. These were where prices were, so they can easily revert back to those levels. So these are, as I say, these are extreme, but very plausible, and that can happen. And we'll go to the next slide where I'll show, you can look at the history and you can see that this has happened. If you look at, this is natural gas prices, but this is, natural gas basically sets the price of electricity on the margins. If I were to plot electricity prices, it'll look very similar, it's just the unit will be different. You can see during financial crisis, in a very short amount of time, prices came down, forward prices came down 70%. And we're talking about a 44% drop. So we've seen scenarios like this, and we've seen more extreme scenarios than what we're modeling. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So what does this mean? So when we modeled these stress prices, we basically see there would be a significant draw on our reserves. A little bit about the base case, and some of these numbers are in the appendix, and I'm not necessarily want to go through these base case numbers because they look very good with the assumptions that we've made. And these assumptions are relevant in the context of the stress test so that we can make, you know, from a modeling perspective, assumptions that are meaningful when we model the stress test relative to the base case. So base case would show that our projections look very good, but there's a lot of uncertainty out there. You cannot bank on those numbers. They're based on prices today. Prices can change on a dime, and those numbers would change. And that's where the stress and the risk management comes in. And then there are a lot of caveats that I've listed on the slide that should be taken into account when you read these numbers. But what's important is the delta between the stress case we model and the base case. And if you look at the stress case and the numbers we're showing there, that's the projected days cash on hand. And on average, our burn rate is about $1 million a day. So they translate to actually what the reserve levels would be as well. Because, you know, so instead of 41 in 2025, fiscal year ending 2025, you can say, I'm saying, if the stress test were to occur, we'd be left with about 41 days of cash on hand, which is equivalent to about, close to about 41 million in reserves. And that's a pull of about 185 million. And what we want to target that within a 2-year physical period, we don't go below 120 days of cash on hand. And there's good reasons for that. More emphasis on 2 years because of the way the PG&E's rates work, the way the PCIA works. You know, when the PG&E sets, when the CPUC approves the PCIA rates for 1 year, it's not guaranteed even for that year because there's a true-up, there's a balancing account mechanism, so that even though you could have a good margin in 1 year, the next year you could be giving some of that margin back because of the balancing account mechanism and the way the PCIA works. So that's why there's more emphasis on the 2-year time period. So as the numbers show that if the stress test were to occur, we could be in a position that by 2026, we would run out of cash. So what we want to do when we set reserve targets is we want to set reserve targets such that we are in a position that if the stress test were to occur, you know, between 2 fiscal years, we don't drop below 120 days of cash on hand. And the latter 3 years of the 5-year period, planning period, we don't drop below 90 days of cash on hand. You know, we want to have extra emphasis on the 2-year horizon, but we also want to look out 5 years and not just a short time period. Any questions so far? And I'll go to the next slide. So then it comes to how we set the reserve target levels. And this is the approach we used last year, and we're going to use the same approach this year, which is what should we build the reserve levels to, the target level. And I'm showing the illustrative target right now, if I were to use this results that I've modeled here, which says build reserves to 270 days of cash on hand, which means if we build to that level and we have the stress test occur, then we would go down, assuming we maintain our discount at 1% to PG&E rates, we would go down to 120 days of cash on hand under a stress scenario situation. So this says target to build reserves to that level. And the upper target there is looking at the 5-year period. If the stress test conditions were to occur, we want to make sure that over the 5-year period, we don't go below 90 days of cash on hand. So that's how these targets are derived. These are illustrative numbers because I want to, at this meeting, go through the methodology. And then when we do the budget numbers in July, we will update the numbers. We're doing preliminary set of numbers right now, and we're going to update those numbers, and I'll talk about budget in the next slide, next presentation as well. We will refresh these numbers so that they're consistent with the numbers we use to set the budget, and we'll come up with a new set of numbers, and we'll use that to base our recommendation when we come to the board and we do a preview of the budget in August. So that we can get the board's feedback at that point, and so that the budget and the reserve targets are ready for approval in September, before our fiscal year begins in October. Okay.
Did you have one first? Let's go with Director, Vice Chair. Walia.
Amrit, thank you. Just a quick question. I'm a little confused here. So with the idea of the possibility of market prices dropping, the current targets versus the new illustrative targets, and I understand it'll change with budget, why is there a drop in the goal and the upper from 285 to 270 and 490 to 390? I'm thinking, has the situation improved? It shouldn't be.
It's basically where we see the prices today than what we modeled last year. And there's a couple of metrics there. So I wouldn't read too much into this. And we're still going to discuss internally if the numbers were to come up, would we recommend a drop, or would we say it's within the same band, let's stay with it. And that's a discussion we're going to have internally. But these numbers, they're sensitive to the way we model. So there will be movements, and prices are not static. So one reason is the prices are different, and then the volatility measure. Because as I said, we took the 1 percentile level. When the volatility measure moves, and that can change the distribution, and therefore where the 1 percentile comes in at. And when I do this in July, these numbers will change. And we're going to give some more thought about how confident we are in those distributions. And a lot of these we use Ascend Analytics in the way they build their distribution. So there's some mathematical, statistical modeling assumptions that go into this. We'll give some thought to that. They're in the ballpark. Whether we'll show you what this methodology, what the numbers come in at, and then we'll have a discussion whether we should just blindly go with the model results, or we should stay within the band we're at.
Okay, thank you. It was just a surprise to me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Director Makachuk.
I appreciate the perspective of looking at a collapse in prices, and it would be horrible to have entered into purchase agreements at a high price with the market price being a low price. And it makes me wonder, as I'm listening to this, what happens to PG&E, SoCal Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric if there is a price collapse? I mean, what's going to happen to them? And what are our peers going to be doing? So, don't want you to spend a lot of time on that, but just like in that scenario, what would we see the landscape being?
So we do model that. So that's what's modeled here. So if you remember, the risk we're modeling here is the revenue risk, which is the rate we can charge, and revenues are a function of market prices. And there's two reasons they're a function of market prices. One is the way we set our rates, and I'll go through that in the next presentation. We target to stay competitive to PG&E, and we've been in good position since our inception to be at a discount to PG&E. So we target to be below PG&E. So it matters where PG&E comes in, And then we also look at the PCIA, right? Because our customers have to pay PCIA. So net of PCIA, we want our customers to be better than if they were with PG&E. So in this modeling, we use a good model, a Cal CCA NewGen consulting model, to model PG&E rates to the best ability we can with publicly available data. And we model PCIA. So we take into the account where those numbers would be and the impact it has on us in our revenue with the methodology we have of setting rates.
Sorry, I had forgotten about how the PCIA protects PG&E.
Yeah,
and I'm sorry, it just dawned on me that that's something that they don't have that we or our customers would bear, and that would, I understand now.
Yeah, and PG&E, I mean, we are sort of like a more startup business, like a business, right? We run out of revenues. We don't have the balance sheet. We can go out of business. PG&E is not going to go out of business. They have balancing account, so they don't make money on the commodity piece. They don't lose money. And when I say make money, that means on the buying and selling. To the extent they generate, they get an authorized rate of return on capital invested. But ignoring that, so they have a balancing account. They can go to the PUC, says my costs were higher than what we set in rates last year. Let's increase rate this year to cover for last year. And same happens if it goes the other way. So they're protected. We don't have that. We have our reserves, our balance sheet. Basically, reserves is our balance sheet. So we have to have that to protect us, or we go out of business. We don't have the balancing account mechanism. We can't say to the customer, hey, we charged you low last year. We're going to charge you higher last year. They're going to say, no, we're going to go to PG&E. They're lower this year.
Thank you.
Okay, this is going to get a little wonky here. Did I hear from your previous slide that this is a 1 percentile chance?
From a modeling perspective.
So are you telling me that it's a 3 standard deviation kind of scenario?
2 point something.
Okay. Because, statistical process control will say you've got, say, your X bar and R charts on 95% or 2 standard deviations. So was that too wonky? Well, so is this a really strict way of looking at it? On the other hand, all those things only apply when there's a normal distribution anyway.
It's not. It's a standard metric used in risk. It's usually within 5 percentile to 1 percentile levels. But as I said, there are a lot of strong assumptions that go into modeling a distribution of prices. Which is prices behave normally. Anyways, I can go into a lot of financial theory on this, but those are strong assumptions. As I said, they miss disruptions in market, right? Just like interest rate variability, wiped out Silicon Valley Bank. As I showed in the one of the slides, in the energy crisis, in the financial crisis, none of those models were predicting the 1 percentile drop to the 70% drop that occurred. There was like many standard deviations away, and then the 1 percentile. So there's a lot of inherent weaknesses in the way we build those distributions. Okay. And so we can't just say, that's why we do the stress tests. We say, what are some of the extreme events that can occur? I can go more extreme than 1 percentile, and that's one of the reasons I said we're going to have some discussions if the numbers imply too lower of a target, because there's inherent weaknesses in modeling. Rather than 1 percentile, I could have just said, let's use the percentage drop we saw in the financial crisis. Let's use that. And that would have come up with much larger set of numbers. But that I can easily explain a rationale for doing so, because that's been experienced in the past. So
thank you.
There are a lot of weaknesses in price distribution building. So it's not as precise as some of the other processes.
I see there's a lot behind the scenes. Do we have any other comments? Director Scozola?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I know I mentioned it before, but I really appreciate, seeing such an emphasis on having high reserve targets. I mean, I've lived through enough boom and bust cycles, and oh, my knees are aching. I feel another recession is coming. And so having as high as possible reserve targets, I think that's just wise, and so I'm really happy with seeing that emphasized. Thank you.
Let's see if we have any public comment. Or were you not done?
I'm done. This
Sorry.
is just the next step, which I've already talked about.
Was I signaling? I don't know. Let me see if we have any public comment. I don't see any in the room. And do we have any online? No, we do not. Well, thank you very much for that. That's really quite reassuring. And, when you have a risk presentation, I don't expect to get reassured, but your answers reassured me. With that, let's move on to item number 5, which is the budget framework, and it looks like Amrit is still with us.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the budget framework, and again, we've gone through this with the Finance Committee and the Executive Committee. So this is not the budget, and we'll go to the next slide. So at this point, we're basically presenting some of the assumptions and methodologies that we're using to develop the budget, and right now we're computing preliminary set of numbers that I'm hoping we can share with the Executive Committee next week. So at this point, I'm asking the board for any feedback on the principles and assumptions. The final numbers, we will refresh them in July. We want it to be as close to the approval date, which is September, because of the volatility in prices. And the methodology I'm presenting, we may tweak them if the results are if we find some oddness in the way the results come out. But that's a footnote I'm making here. I don't expect any, but with numbers, strange things can happen. So I'm reserving that by putting this footnote. So main areas of discussion that I'm going to go through in the budget framework, I'm going to talk about revenue modeling. And I've already alluded to that in the stress test about the risks of revenues, and I'll talk a little bit about that, the PCIA and PG&E generation rate. The reserve targets, we talked about that, so it'll be just about how we use the stress test. And then I'll talk about some of the balancing act that the board has to do. With the numbers that will come out, the board will basically have to decide what the customer discount rate should be. How much should we set aside additional beyond the 2% of revenues that we set aside each year for programs, if any additional funding should be set aside? And how much should we set aside for reserves for the risks that we just talked about in the stress test analysis? So just want to frame that. And we'll talk about power supply costs. And obviously, this is the biggest cost we have in our portfolio, which is highly volatile. And then I'll talk about some of the other cost drivers. One of the things we're looking at is it the right time for us to basically buy an office space as opposed to continue to lease an office space, given that we're maturing out of the startup phase, and we know we're here for a long time. We've got commitments that are on our books that are for a long time, and what makes financial sense. So I'll talk a little bit about that and want to definitely get feedback, and we'll take those feedback in the way we'll build the budget. So we'll go to the next slide. So a little bit about the timeline. So we started the framework discussion we had with the Finance Committee in May, and with the Exec Committee in June. We're having the discussion with the board now. What will happen next is we will develop the budget. We will bring a draft budget to the Finance Committee in August. We won't have much time between the August meeting with the Finance Committee and the presentation we make to the board, because there's just not enough time in that with the time the materials get posted. But we'll do our best to incorporate Finance Committee feedback, or we'll share that feedback that we get with the board at the August meeting. And what we want to do in the August meeting is basically present the budget, get all your substantial feedback on the budget, and then in August we'll incorporate that, so that when we come back to the board in September, it's a short meeting and the board is ready to approve the budget, and we have an approved budget when we start our fiscal year in October. And as we do every year, we will we'll have a refresh of the budget in March. You know, we call it the budget adjustment. It's very important for us because we deal with a very volatile commodity, energy prices. So we have to look at budgets frequently, and we're actually going to propose. There'll be another look in the late in the fall and close to December timeframe, and I'll talk about that. Something similar to what we did last year. And we're good. Okay, so the revenue forecasting. So revenue is price times quantity, right? The quantity is really not much of a question here. Load is going up, but those really, in a given 1 year to next year, load doesn't change that much. So when we talk about revenue uncertainty, we're really talking about rate. You know, what rate can we charge our customers? And there, with our methodology that we have, we want to be competitive to PG&E, as we talked about earlier. So we want, the blue box is what we can charge, you know, offsetting the PCIA so that our customers' rate is competitive relative to the rate we charge our customers is competitive relative to PG&E's rates, and they can get the targeted discount. So obviously, if the PCIA, the orange box goes up, the blue box shrinks. If the PG&E rate, the black line there comes down, the blue box, which is the only thing we can control, shrinks, right? And that's a risk we talked about in the stress test that we're modeling, where we have a lot of revenue uncertainty driven by market prices. So market prices is basically what's going to dictate where that blue box comes in, because market prices will affect where PG&E sets its rates and where PCIA gets set. Now, the first look at that we get as to what the 2024 rates will be is in mid-May, PG&E issued its preliminary forecast for what PCIA and PG&E's generation rate will be. The number that they came up with looks very good. So based on those numbers, next year looks good, if we were to believe in those numbers. PCIA actually goes negative for us. Their generation rate increases slightly, but the drop in PCIA actually makes it in a situation there we can actually lower our customers' rates, but our margin actually improves because of the negative PCIA. But unfortunately, the market conditions have changed already. So when PG&E did their estimates, they did it in the end of March timeframe when market prices were quite high. Since then, prices have come down quite a bit, more than 12, somewhere around 12% on average. So when we model using the new gen model, we're showing that if we were to stick with our 4% discount on an annual basis, we're looking at 14 to 19% drop in revenues. And that's as of mid-May when we modeled it, which is the time when PG&E issued its forecast. The forecast was already outdated the day they issued it. And that's because, we're dealing with a very volatile commodity. Now, PG&E will update this forecast in fall, basically in the October timeframe. And if the CPUC sticks with their schedule, based on their filing, they will issue a final rate, approve PG&E's tariffs in their last meeting in December. So what we're recommending is we do what we did last year, which is we hold off on major additional expenditure discussions, major decisions on additional customer discounts until we get to that late in fall. We'll basically come back to the board like we did last year and we say, looks like PG&E's rates are going to come in at this level, PCIA will be at this level. Based on that, what should our targeted discount rate be? What should our additional expenditures be in programs? Let's wait till that decision time frame. And it really has no consequence to us. We're going to recommend, covering many slides now in this one slide, so I'm giving preview of some of the other slides to come as well. Basically, we're going to recommend that we stick with the current 4% discount till the end of this year, so don't change rates right now or our targeted discount rate because this year's financials look good. But for deciding the rate in 2020, customer discount rate for 2024, let's hold on till we get to that November, December timeframe when we have more certainty on where the PG&E rates will come in, and we can then make a decision on any additional discount. We can agree on a preliminary discount level, which will look at the budget numbers. It will probably be 1 or 2%. And if we have opportunity to increase that, let's have that discussion in the November, December timeframe. Okay. So we're going to use new gen model we used last year. The model is very good. We're going to calibrate that model. We're going to make a 10% downward adjustment for modeling error, and we went through the reasons for that at in the Finance and Exec Committee meetings. It's something we did last year. It is basically we used the model to calibrate to the results we got with the May PG&E rate to see, what's the modeling error. So we want to account for some uncertainty due to modeling error there. Is basically what we're doing. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So the reserve targets, so I won't spend a lot of time on this because we just talked about that. So during the budget time frame, we're going to update our reserve targets as we talked about. We're going to use the stress test methodology we went through. We're going to refresh that with the same set of market prices we're using to develop the budget, and we'll come back to the board with a recommendation as to where the reserve targets will be. And we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so this is, I covered this a little bit earlier. So depending on where the numbers are, the board will have to balance between building reserves, additional program spending, and additional customer discount. So again, we want to provide a competitively priced, high-valued product, 100% clean energy. We are a cost-of-service-based organization. We're a nonprofit organization. The funds we don't need for operations, we flow back to our customers in the form of discounts, right? But what does the cost of service include? Cost of service includes cost of obviously covering our operations, meeting our reserve targets so that we can withstand the risks that we talked about in the stress tests, and we're around as an organization so that an event like that doesn't wipe us out. And then we're able to fund our decarbonization programs and serve our mission. So that's what we're basically doing in the way we manage our finances. So we will come back with some recommendations, and the programs group, Justin, has put some packages together as to what some of the programs, additional programs that we could offer, and we'll probably go through that discussion towards the end of the year. We'll preview that with the EC. But again, we don't have to make those decisions because the programs right now is very well funded, and we don't need to make those additional decisions now until later in the year, because we don't have actually, we're at capacity right now with the implementation that we've undertaken. Okay. On the power supply side, again, this is bulk of our expenses, greater than 90%, very volatile, just as prices affect revenue sides. Obviously, they have a one-to-one correlation with where the power supply expenses come in. One-to-one to the extent of our open position. We are fairly well hedged, so we locked in prices, currently 85% hedged, so 50% still exposed to market prices. There are uncertainties out there with RA prices being high, with contract delays and potential for renegotiations. But at this point, we don't see any reason to change our procurement strategy. So we're saying, there's no reason to revisit that strategy. So we'll stay the course with the procurement plan that Monica and the team are pursuing. So at the budget time, we'll basically use the market data prices to basically value our power procurement portfolio, and that will be the projected cost And again, it's a snapshot at the time we do the budget, right? Because again, we look at where market prices are trading at the time we do the budget, and that's where we forecast. And the day after we do the analysis, it's already a little bit outdated because prices have moved. But that's why we have reserves for uncertainty, the risk, and that's why we revisit the budget, the frequencies we revisit at least a mini refresh in the fall and a full-blown adjustment for major categories in the media budget adjustment in March. Good, next slide. So the other costs, we are also going to come back with some staffing recommendations. As an organization, we're growing. So last fiscal year, we added 10 new positions. We've hired 13 new staff members. We have currently 4 remaining vacancies and about to increase to 6 with some recent announcements. We're going to come back with some recommendations for adjustments of salaries to make sure we stay competitive with other players in our industry and other CCAs. We're going to make a recommendation for adjustment for cost of living, adjustment for merit. We are going to ask for additional headcount. Our programs is growing, and to fully utilize the funds and to further advance in our mission, we're at least going to need 2 to 3 more staff at a minimum. We'll have better recommendation next week for the exec committee. And then we're going to need some marketing folks to basically market those programs. And then we're going to need some people in our procurement area. We're looking at some people in finance. We probably reached a time where we should have a dedicated focus on HR role. And we probably will need another financial analyst. So we're pulling that plan together, and we're going to share some details with the exec committee next week. Okay. So coming back to the office space, we've been leasing our office space. We're currently close to 8,000 square feet. Our lease runs through September of 2025. It takes time to make this buy versus lease decision, so we want to start now is a good time. There may be some attractive opportunities in the marketplace given softening of commercial real estate. So we think this is the right time frame. We should be looking at that. Obviously, we're going to be around as an organization. We have commitments on our book that go out to 20, 30 years. So it's basically good financial stewardship to basically look at what's economical for us on a long-term basis. We did some preliminary analysis that shows that we could basically get, break even within 10-year period. But we'll do more detailed analysis on this. But we want to run this idea by the board, get feedback, and based on that feedback, we will adjust our budget. We're thinking setting aside something like $20 million as a fund transfer to a building fund. We're asking that there be an ad hoc committee with board members who can advise us as we build this as we make this decision on lease versus buy. And we want to look at a space that basically can support where the organization is right now in our hybrid work style, which is more collaborative work style. We want to have some room for maybe some customer activities. We have to give some of that thought. So there will be some design things that we will have to go consider that can basically, help us function better as an organization and maybe also be a better demo center maybe for our customers as well. So we wanted to bring this topic in this framework discussion so we can get early feedback from the board members. And go to the next slide. This is the last slide. This is just a summary slide. Again, we're going to come back with detailed numbers to the board in August, incorporate your feedback. At that point, we'll ask you to make some trade-off decisions. Again, you don't have to make hard numbers now. We'll make those later in the year when there's more certainty on PG&E rates. But we'll float some of these numbers. We'll want approval on staffing levels, approval on employee cost of living and merit adjustments, and a decision on and setting aside funding for building space. With that, I'll open it up for questions.
All right, thank you, Amrit. Is that a question?
Yes, it is.
Okay, Director Klein, please.
Yes, so not specifically to the budget, and I understand where you're working from as far as that standpoint, but a lot of this, and as we talk about discounts, and I think one of the good things we did this year was the 4% discount and trying to get more people to conceivably come to SVCE if they're not already there. And one of the things that PG&E is just currently proposed, and this is in relationship to the AB 205 trailer bill that went through kind of quietly last year, and now we're looking at the repercussions, is the fixed income for distribution. Now, at least from a PG&E standpoint, they're saying that residential rates will actually go down whenever that's implemented. And it's, you know, and it's actually, and I don't know if it's an apples to apples rate change for us. And, you know, it's still, there's a lot of, let's say, murk around the whole proposal, what the CPUC will say, and whether or not the legislature will come back and take a look at it from that standpoint. But as we're in, conceivably whatever would happen wouldn't happen until 2024, 2025 budget. That being said, would any possible rate decrease from a PG&E standpoint, and this kind of goes back to, you know, what our previous discussion on what might happen, would any dramatic rate increase from PG&E change, and I understand we're talking about a year ahead, would it change our vision of what we would be doing?
So I'll take a shot at it. PG&Es, PG&E gets a certain pot of dollars that they have to collect to cover their cost, procurement costs. So those dollars should not change. It's a shifting of those dollars between fixed charges and variable charges. So when they say rates are not going to change, on average, they should not change because they have to collect the same amount of dollars. Now, there will be winners and losers within the customer. On average, it's not going to change. And the way they're designing it based on legislation is it favors the lower income customers, right? So if they're winning, someone else is losing. So higher income customers are obviously would be paying more so that PG&E can collect the same pot of dollars. The way the proposal right now it seems to be on the transmission and distribution side. We're going to monitor to see if there's on generation. So hopefully generation side is not impacted, which means you know, our rates could continue to mirror the way it is right now to be comparable to PG&E's. So on average, you know, that's what would happen. But there are some other implications we have to think through. You know, what does it mean for electrification? And could this promote the goal of electrification where the variable cost comes down? And there may be some good impacts there that we want to think through.
Yeah, really nothing more to add. I think this is an initiative that we need to look at more. I think what you were hinting at was longer term, right?
Right.
It may not impact this year's budget, which is up, but what do we think about it longer term? I think there's quite a bit of concern about this because it didn't go through the whole policy kind of gamut. So, yeah, so I don't think the story is completely written on this yet.
No, and I agree. It's just I've seen, and in looking at the proposal, it's like, oh yeah, it's supposed to be completely on transmission and distribution. And then I see all the rates will go down. And if we're, you know, if we're looking at what we, you know, how we're doing the respective rates and those discounts to certain customers, that's my only worry. And, you know, I understand it's supposed to be a flat, okay, it's just moving money around and conceivably charging certain customers more, but there seems to be a little bit more to that, at least the way PG&E's kind of highlighting what they're trying to do. So I don't see it as a critical, okay, we need to do something for this year's budget. That being said, I do worry about where we might be a year from now, depending upon where all this, to me, it'll be positive from PG&E in any way. That it's like they'll move things to fixed. Conceivably, they lower the kilowatt hour delivery, and we have to catch up, and it basically pings all the CCAs because they've played a little fast and loose with the numbers of what's really fixed. And that's my only, I'm raising that as a future issue, and I'm sure staff is, directly following what's going on from that standpoint, but it does play with how much money conceivably we have in reserves a year and a half from now or 2 years from now, if in case we have to respond to, let's say, a PG&E operation that we can't quickly respond to.
Definitely, we will monitor that, and we have teams monitoring that, but we'll make sure that things stay in the right bucket.
Yeah.
Things don't get moved into generation that don't belong there, and or taken out of generation or so.
That's fine. Okay, thank you.
Director Klein, I think you're suggesting that he adds legislation to the stress testing because it's not complicated enough already.
It's in there.
If we could have a crystal ball figuring out what legislation might be there, it would be useful, but we don't know.
That's right. Do we have any other comments or questions? I do not see any here. I do not see any online. Do we have any public comment? I don't see any here nor online. So thank you very much for that presentation. And there's certainly a ton for us to think about. So with that, let's move on to any board member announcements and direction on future agenda items. Do we have any suggestions?
Not a suggestion, but I would like to, since we talked earlier about the visit last week to the geothermal plant, which I hear was fabulous, I'd like to mention something that I got the opportunity to attend. I know Director Mohan was there with me as well, and a few other council members from our county. So this was the Silicon Valley Leadership Group's Energy Summit last Thursday, and I had attended last year as well. I found there was a different energy, perhaps because we are, well, pun unintended, really. Maybe we are coming out of COVID, and so this was different. But one of the, and this is intended, the really energetic presence was of the U.S. Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm. She was there in person, and she talked about what's happening at the federal level. And she was followed by the US EPA Administrator, Michael Reagan, and both of them, the moderator was SVLG CEO, Emmett Thomas, and it was really, really, really good. So I just wanted to share that with everyone.
Thank you. Any others? Oh, Director Martinez Beltran, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to take a moment to thank Carbon Free Mountain View. It's been an absolute honor to serve on this board, and with my colleagues who are currently here and before, I've learned so very much and tried to share as much as I can with my community. And I really appreciate the recognition, as I know they appreciate those who've served and given their time to this organization. It's a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. With that, I'm going to move on to public comment on our closed session. You can see we have a closed session coming up, and I will invite public comment on the items that are listed under that. Do we have any public comment? I do not see any in the room and nor online. And with that, we are now going to retire, is that the right word, to closed session? And then we will return to open session to close the meeting. Thank you. I did.
First and third.
Oh, okay.
Do we turn on the recording again? Boy, look at this red face I've got. Ah, am I really that red?
No, you're not. I noticed that too. You look really red there, but
Oh, yeah, you're not.
Okay. Jeez.
You look tan.
Okay. Thank you. We're returning from closed session. We have nothing to report. And with that, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.